Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world, and welcome to today's SecurityBoulevard.com webinar, brought to you by TechStrong and Contrast Security. My name is Cody J. Brown. I'm the host of TechStrong Learning. We have an exciting presentation ahead, but first I have just a couple of housekeeping notes. First off, today's session is being recorded, so if you miss any of our discussion or you'd like to rewatch, the on-demand recording will be made available shortly after we conclude our on-demand today. If you have any questions, we want you to go ahead and submit those using the Q&A panel on the right. And for any other comments, we have the chat tab for you to direct those. At the conclusion of our webinar, we will be giving away 4 $25 Amazon gift cards, so be sure to stick around. Our topic today is adding DevSecOps to detect and protect your organization's workspace with Contrast Security and VMware. And I'm joined today by Mark Tanzu, Senior Alliance Solutions Architect at Contrast Security, and Ankur Pepneha, Product Manager at Contrast Security. And it's my pleasure at this point in time to turn the program over to Mark. Mark and Ankur, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Hi, my name is Mark Tanzu, and with my buddy here, Ankur. And today we'll be talking about DevSecOps with VMware Tanzu and Contrast Security. Before we get into it, just a quick agenda on the topics we'll cover. So first, we're going to start with some introductions, a little background on us. We're going to talk about software delivery at a glance. So basically how things get out the door in terms of software development. DevSecOps, so basically taking everything that we know in terms of how security is being encompassed into DevOps and cloud native and security as value. Extending the security across the entire pipeline and software delivery cycle. We're going to talk about how Contrast fits with VMware and how both combined create a really good value prop. And finally, we're going to end up with some questions. So some introductions. So my name is Mark Tanzu. I work at Contrast Security on the alliances side. I've been doing software development and management for over about 10 years now, which seems like forever, but it's not that long. But basically everything, microservices, serverless, distributed technologies, and I'm starting to branch into things like blockchain, all with security in mind. So Ankur, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, of course. Hey everyone, my name is Ankur Pepneja. I also work for Contrast Security. I'm on the product management team, and my area of focus is integrations here today.
Awesome. So software delivery at a glance. So when you think software delivery, you have to basically look at the entire process it takes for software to get into the hands of your end consumers. Everything from the conceptualization, so basically the feature sets that you're planning, right, through the development, deployment, testing, all the way through the lifecycle until it ends up into your consumer's hands, right? And this is where the value props come into play. This is the heart of your software factory. It's the essence by which basically all your value streams mold into a singular pipeline that takes your software from the conception stage in terms of feature sets and delivers that to your end consumer. And one thing to note about this in terms of software delivery is the fact that cross-functional application teams are consuming this via pipelines. And these are actually how you scale things across different software portfolios and application sets. So as an example, when you're talking software delivery and things like digital transformation, you start looking at codifying your entire business process and your business logic, right? And the way this works is when you have a cross-functional application team, what these teams are doing are actually consuming this automation via pipelines. And we'll be going over that as well. This is a diagram that basically goes over what we were just talking about. So here you have 3 different application teams. You have app team 1, 2, and 3. And in these application teams, everyone's cross-functional. So what this means is everybody has a generalistic idea of what's going on. Sure, you have some people who are SMEs, but essentially you have all the responsibilities and all the talent necessary to get software out the door without having to reach out to different departments. And this is huge because in terms of the automation, all you do is basically have the platform team create automation via the pipeline and have developers hook into this pipeline. So as an example, developer comes in, they take a pipeline, hook it up to their application, and they can actually go through and start committing code and focus on solely delivering code bases for the business itself. And Ankur, do you want to step in before I move on?
Yeah, of course. So there's a lot of parts of the pipeline that can be a lot of components that can be automated through the pipeline, and the responsibility of these platform teams and the benefit that they provide to different application teams is the standardization of using all these different components, where security becomes a very important one.
Exactly. And he actually got ahead of it. So the whole thing with including security as a value stream, and Ankur, forgive me, you've been hinting at this, but essentially what you want to do is have a systematic approach to the business workflows, right? Everything is a build, everything tests, everything deploys, and everything is some type of gating, whether it be automated or manual. If you're making software for money, essentially for revenue, so if you have a revenue stream that's generated through software, you have to have those checks and balances in place to ensure that what you put in is what comes out, and it can be audited and compliant and safe, right? And then if you look at the tools and the processes that represent these value streams, you start to realize that all these different departments, so before things like DevOps, right, you had to go through and actually go to different departments to go get that value in terms of integrating that into the process flow. So as an example, it could be access management, it could be security even, but you'd be reaching out to these different departments to get the value instead of doing this programmatically through things like APIs and a pipeline. And the big thing here is DevOps breaks the silos. It doesn't necessarily mean automation, but it lends itself to automation, right? And Ankur, I'll have you step in about a second, just give a little thought about that as well. But what we want to take away from this slide is the fact that DevOps just creates the communication between these different sectors and value streams, and cloud native takes it a step further in terms of the automation. Without those business processes actually going through and talking to each other in terms of value, it's going to be really hard to automate this via pipeline.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head there. And there's all these different capabilities from cloud native that you see there that can take that to the next stage. And once you have all these components automated, there's a lot of standard value that can be applied across the app teams.
Exactly. And this just basically summarizes what we're just talking about. So when you think platform team, right, there are different names for them. Platform team, DevOps team, cloud team. What they do essentially is create APIs for these different value streams, so you can programmatically go to these different departments, right, to gain the value without actually doing things like creating a request. Could you imagine creating a request for every type of integration you have via pipeline? Right? That would Are you going to add something?
Oh no, I was just going to say, yeah, that's I can't imagine that.
I've seen it. So I've been a part of many digital transformations, and what people need to ingrain when actually doing digital transformations or any type of modernization within the enterprise, you have to take into account that these different responsibilities are usually different departments. So that being said, you need a programmatic way, an easy way without actually having to hound somebody down, right, to get that value prop inside that value stream. And this is how it all comes together. So I mentioned that the platform team creates the pipelines, right, and takes those value streams and molds them into basically a workflow where an application can take these value streams and get the application to the end consumer with all that value. The big thing you want to take away from this in terms of security and DevSecOps is the actionable telemetry, because what you're doing is you're solidifying your development practices at the same time you're solidifying the scale and the way things are actually delivered in-house, right? Where you're taking this telemetry and creating actions from this telemetry to where you're evolving delivery to where you're actually removing the human element, which is actually a good thing. Because if you take humans out of the picture in terms of delivery, what you can do is actually justify every single action based on a data point instead of having had to go to somebody. Does that make sense? So as an example, when I'm going through and I'm logging all this information, all these different metadata points in my pipeline, I don't have to hunt anybody down because it's already in the pipeline. So if something breaks or if there's another issue with the actual execution, right, I can go through and all that evidence is basically adjusted and stored on my pipeline instance. Do you have anything to add here before I move on?
No, let's keep going.
Awesome. And this is where we talk about extending security. And what we mean by this is we're going to be talking about application security, but there's different avenues, right? And Ankur's nodding his head. We have networking, we have container, we have policy management for all this stuff. We have infrastructure security. There are many different aspects, right? There's container scanning. What we're going to be talking about today is just the application side, but just imagine all these different value streams that encompass in security that need to be incorporated with your application as you use things like bill of materials and going and enhancing your software supply chain. And this describes just that. So you have to include security in all the levels of your software lifecycle and development phase, right? Lower level workflows, higher level workflows. What this does is actually enhances not only your product, but ultimately the means by which you make your product. You actually want to move things as far left as possible in terms of remediation, right? Because the further right you move along, the more expensive it is. So as an example, if I have a bug, right? I want that stuff fixed in development. I don't want to have it show up in my lower level environments, right? If it's missed, or in my production environment, right? Excuse me. This is how it all fits together in terms of like your bill of materials and your software supply chain. You have to make sure everything is in accordance of what comes in and what's expected as an outcome. And Ankur, do you want to touch upon this a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, you see here these three arrows pointing to the different environments that you can deploy applications to. And it's not just the first or the last environment that you want to stream security value into. It's all of them, because the earlier you can get feedback, the lower the it will be to address it. And so there's different types of security you can get at different stages. If you add it to development, you can get value from static scans, for example. If you add it to a test environment, you can get security results that depend on testing. So you want to make sure to stream security value into all stages of the workflow so that it's possible to catch every single type of security value as early as often.
Exactly. I couldn't have said it better myself. And one thing I'll add is things like test-driven development actually take center stage here, where you just don't want to have a catch-all in your pipeline. You want to make sure your development practices are matching that. So you're enhancing your tests and overall going through and enhancing the value of your product as well.
Yeah.
And what are the keys to success? Well, we kind of mentioned this already. Security by design. It's got to be at the forefront. It's got to be at the ground level, right? Everything that you do should have an aspect of security allocated to it. There are many different aspects in terms of application overall, but you want to have this at the ground level so all your implementations moving forward have the same abilities, meaning I have application A, B, and C, right? I want to make sure all this stuff is bootstrapped for all three apps, right? If these are all apps that are client-facing. Because if they're client-facing, they're probably revenue generating, right? And because of that, I want to make sure that by design, they're safe. And this goes into like test-driven security, right? Test-driven development, test-driven security. You have tests that basically justify and go through all your different phases and all the different business logic accompanying with your feature sets. You want to make sure you're covered. You want to make sure there's an inclusion in your cross-functional application teams. There has to be a representative in those teams, because without that representative, it's going to be really hard for a product owner to actually go through and segregate work for a developer. Because remember, the developer's sole purpose, sole job is to create code for the business. So what needs to happen is the product owner has to get with the security person to actually go through, see what's relevant within the application in terms of workload, see what needs to be fixed, enhanced, and give that off to the dev to actually work on it. We kind of touched upon shift left as well. You want to make sure that you're shifting as far left as possible, because it's basically more or less, it's the cheapest fix, right? And what I mean by that is you want to catch it at the beginning because it costs the business much more money the further right it goes along in the actual delivery process. In terms of shared responsibility, you want to make sure that everyone has a piece in terms of value delivery, right? So whether it be security, identity access management, you want to make sure that everyone's doing their job because it matters. You want to fail fast. And this goes back towards test-driven development. I want to catch things at the beginning, because if I catch things in the beginning, it's very cheap to fix and it's very fast. If I'm catching things more downstream, it becomes very, very, very expensive. And this gets into empowering processes and teams. If you solidify your business processes, it becomes much easier to automate this. I don't know how many times I've seen clients where they'll ask about enhancing their automation, but they do not have the underlying business processes down. So it becomes very, very difficult to actually manufacture, or enhance automation because you need those processes basically solidified prior to any type of automation, making it faster. Because if you don't, you're just creating a huge mess. And this goes into my last point. You have to believe in automation, because if you don't, things can be very, very, very slow. And Ankur, do you have anything to touch upon this?
Yeah, I think, Mark, you covered multiple decades worth of learnings and advice into a concise slide. So I think the audience here should just take a screenshot of this and save it for later, because this is going to be very valuable for the business.
Awesome. So what we're gonna do now is just step into how contrast plays with VMware Tanzu. So you wanna take this away, Ankur?
Yeah, so Contrast at a high level offers a platform for application security testing tools. There's different parts of the application that we analyze. So starting off with open source components to help with supply chain security. We also scan custom code through both static analysis as well as instrumentation to provide you with the best method to figure out the most accurate results. And then we also provide runtime protection to complement that instrumentation that we do in the testing phase. And our newest offering is related to serverless security. We detect vulnerable findings within AWS Lambda functions, and that rounds out our platform for application security testing.
Yeah, one big thing that we want to communicate here is application security doesn't stop at microservices, right? It's every single type of application. Because if you really think about it, if you're looking at it from a periphery standpoint, right? If I can still access the app and the app is built not the best way, meaning there's a bunch of vulnerabilities, right? That leads to more exploits and more malicious content, which basically can take advantage of your app and steal your IP. So that's something to think about as you kind of go through your digital transformations and whatnot to make sure that you have all your bases covered. So as mentioned, we'll be talking about VMware Tanzu. So this is a quick high level, but what VMware Tanzu is basically a platform as a service that enables enterprises to modernize applications and infrastructure without the hassle of operations. So as an example, what Tanzu does is actually addresses the full life cycle of modern apps. It's complete codified. You've got a framework for it. You have tools, as you can see on the screen here. What this does is streamline a lot of the operational tasks that you would have to do by hand. And Ankur, do you want to go over the available integrations?
Yeah, so Contrast integrates at two important stages of the Tanzu experience, specifically the assemble and deliver stages. So here is where we inject our Contrast agent into applications that run on the Tanzu network. So our agent is the means for instrumentation. And once that agent is installed onto the application, the data flow through tests would trigger our pattern matching analysis so that we could find accurate web application vulnerabilities. And the two main components here are required for that to happen, the Cloud Native Build Pack, as well as the service broker. We'll get into the details in a second, but the two are required to integrate Contrast with Tanzu.
Couldn't have said it better myself. So how do teams leverage the integration? Well, as mentioned before, all applications will require some type of application security. And that being said, when you're using Tanzu, you're either probably doing a lift and shift, using containerized apps, or using both in cloud native applications, meaning it's probably going to be in a container, right? And it's going to be running on that PaaS environment. That being the case, Ankur already mentioned this, you'll need both integrations to actually get this working, to A, get the contrast agent inside because that's how it's instrumented, and then B, have the service broker actually connect it to the outside world. So then your team server, and Ankur will step through this a little bit later, will give you an idea of what you will see within the team server itself once everything is up and running. And the big thing here is everything's pretty much self-service. And what this means is I don't have to go through and code everything. I can go through the marketplace, download it, or even go in the tile itself, click it, fill out some parameters, and get it deployed ASAP. Ankur, you want to give a little bit of value integration?
Sure. So I'll quickly talk about this slide where the essence of integrating contrast with Tanzu is that all the telemetry that is going to get provided by the contrast platform will get integrated into the pipelines that are connected to the Tanzu experience. So all of these from dev to CI/CD, the Tanzu, the telemetry provided by contrast will get injected and consumed during those stages.
Exactly. And this is what we mean by actual telemetry, because what you want to do with the telemetry, again, is create those gates and those different data points and those actionable items to actually promote those best practices, right? You solidify the automation with those business process flows, right?
Exactly.
So we'll get into the setup. And then after the setup, I'll turn it over to Ankur and he'll show you actually how this works, or how this actually looks like in the practical world. So first you have to go through, download the actual build pack. Right now it's out of the box with the standard Java build pack. So it's ingrained with a whole bunch of different tool sets. But what you do is you use the Java build pack and you use that to build your application as you normally would. And what this does is actually obtain the contrast security agent on the spot and uses the credentials bound by the app via the service broker to actually instrument it, right? It's a two-part process. First you build it and then you instrument it. Anything you want to add here before I move on?
No, this looks great.
All right. And then the second part. So basically the service broker. So prior to using the actual service broker tile, you have to have the CLI to set it up. And here you go and you deploy a service broker. I won't step through everything, but what you want to do actually is set this up via CLI. And once you're set up via CLI, you can use this throughout the rest of the application via things like self-service. And Ankur, you want to step through this real quick?
Yeah, so this is just to walk through how you would set up the tile through the UI. The previous slide that Mark walked through was for the CLI setup. Here's where you can do it in a little more user-friendly way if the user is not a developer.
Yeah, so again, the sequence is this. You go through, you use the cloud native build pack, you install the service broker, right, on the actual the platform itself, and then you make it available via a tile. So you can literally go through and a dev can actually select what they need and pass in parameters without having to code anything. And before we get to questions, what we're going to do is we're actually going to show the application, or Ankur will, within the contrast security platform to give you the value that's presented by all this when it comes together. So give me 1 sec while I stop sharing and I give Ankur the screen.
All right. So here is your seeing the contrast portal. We have an application, Tanzu provider search. It's currently online, and we see that in a critical vulnerability has been found after adding the agent to the application via the build pack and service broker. We see that it was a SQL injection, and we're able to step through this to understand the data flow analysis, how the vulnerability is created, and also the remediation guidance so that the developer knows what exactly to change to make it so that the vulnerability no longer exists.
Yeah. And the cool thing here is, so the huge value prop with contrast is you don't need to be a security expert to get the value from contrast. We literally tell you what's wrong through that actionable telemetry and how to remediate. So it's not just a pipeline tool. What this does is actually back, like we were talking about, things like test-driven development and help enhance your actual development process. So as Ankur mentioned, on the overview, you can actually go through and see what's wrong, right? You can see actual headers in the HTTP info and the how to fix. It literally tells you which code to go through and fix within the application itself, which is extremely helpful. So you don't have to do a little Stack Overflow. I know you guys all remember that. Just scroll up a little bit. And then on notes, you can go through and actually create tags on this. So Ankur, do you want to basically step through the overview up top? And maybe you want to choose a different application to kind of give you a little more flavor.
Yeah. So this is a new app that you're seeing that has been instrumented using the contrast agent via the Tanzu network. What you see here is a summary of your security posture. So this application Pet Clinic has received a letter grade of B, and it incorporates both scores from custom code and open source components. You see the number of libraries we have found and also the number that are vulnerable of that total 72. This number right here, the number of routes exercised, is a pretty interesting metric that tells you to what extent your application has been tested. On these 3 routes, we have found these are all the different routes, the different paths that data can flow through your application. And along those 3 routes, we found 5 vulnerabilities in that application. As the application is further tested, exercising all of the remaining 14 routes, other vulnerabilities may be found.
So thank you for showing that, Ankur.
Absolutely,
So
happy to help.
No problem. So what I'll do is I'll go back. All right, share screen. And that was contract security with VMware Tanzu. Thanks again, Ankur. Really appreciate it. And we're
Absolutely.
ready for questions.
Chatting with you, Mark.
Anytime. Thanks again.
See everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Well, thank you, Mark and Ankur, for taking the time to present to us today and put together a demo. It means a lot to us whenever you put together demos like that, so we really appreciate it. Quick reminder that today's session was recorded, so following this webinar, you'll receive an email with a link to access the recording on demand. You can also find the recording living on the Security Boulevard website at securityboulevard.com/webinars and look in the on-demand section. So we do have 4 gift cards to give away. Our first winner is Sorowit P. Our second winner is Ryan K. Our third winner is Helen M. And our fourth and final winner is Kostub C. So congratulations to the 4 of you. Keep an eye on your inbox to claim that gift card. And if you don't see an email, just check your spam folder. My appreciation goes out to Contrast Security for sponsoring today's webinar. And of course, my final thanks goes to you, our audience. We really appreciate you sticking around for the entirety of today's presentation. Please take a moment to fill out our post-webinar survey, and we hope to see you at a future Tech Strong Learning webinar. This is Cody J. Brown signing off. Have a great rest of your day, everyone.